Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first Sexy+Geeky Podcast. I'm recording this one alone, just because it's kind of spur of the moment thing, because I saw something on Tumblr that kind of annoyed me. People seem to be viewing the Bechdel Test as the be-all and end-all of female betrayal in media, which I think is a massive mistake. So, let's have a quick discussion of it here. First off, of course, what is the Bechdel Test? Well, proposed by Alison Bechdel in her comic Dykes to Watch Out For, partly as a joke for the actual comic strip. It's a test with 3 postulates in order for you to look at a film and see how well portrayed women are in it. It's since gone on to expand into other media, such as comics and games and TV series. The 3 postulates are that to pass the test, the film needs to 1. Have 2 named women in it, 2. Talk to each other, about 3. Something other than a man. Now this makes a lot of sense even without applying it to anything, because you can see right off the bat it's actually have a decent number of women in it who are not just there to be on the arm of the male protagonist, and who are capable of talking about things other than their love for him. Seems simple enough, but it's very easy to see just how many films actually completely fail. Now the thing is, recently people have been taking to the Bechdel test as the be-all and end-all of judging female portrayal in films, television and other media, which I think is a stupid idea, really, to put it bluntly. For me, the Bechdel test isn't about judging whether something has good portrayals of women in media, and it's not about judging at all. It's like a thought experiment. It's designed to provoke interest and discussion on something. One of the main ways in which the Bechdel test actually falls down is that it's about women being there at all, not about them being well written. If we don't take this as like a minimum requirement, but take it as how to make a good film with women in it, because if you look at examples in media, that means that Negima is the greatest thing ever to happen to feminism, which it is obviously not. Negima, for those who don't know, is basically just a fun romp by Ken Akamatsu, who made Love Hina. Considering the main cast involves the teacher, Negi, who's a 10-year-old boy from England, teaching his class of 31 Japanese female students. Now, the fact that there's 31 women in here who do talk to each other about things other than men does not mean that it is a fantastic series for, female empowerment or anything. Mostly because it is incredibly Japanese. Part of the reason that why Negi's 10 years old, I think, is to counteract the fact that if he was older, this would be creepy as hell and borderline illegal, since his students, along with all the magical antics, frequently get naked for no particular reason other than it's fun and it's Ken Akamatsu, so why not? The Bechdel test, I don't think, is meant to be about whether something is good at portraying women. Well, it can't be. There's nothing given for context other than that they talk about something other than a bloke. Really, I think it's meant to entice discussion into why something failed the Bechdel test, and allows you to look at something with context. For example, the film 500 Days of Summer does fail, but you look at why and it becomes very obvious. It's a story about Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character and the way that he sees his relationship with Summer. The unreciprocated love, but he's masking it completely as his own feelings. The twists and the turns for him discovering his own emotions compared to those of Zooey Deschanel's character, Summer. Yeah, naturally, this film fails. He plays a pretty normal guy who has male friends and 2 major women in his entire life, Summer and his little sister, who never talk to each other and therefore fails. Making this film pass the Bechdel test would be against the point, considering it's meant to be about his perspective. But then we can apply it to other films such as The Avengers, which, despite being friggin' amazing, obviously, does fail, and we can begin to question and ask why. There are 2 women in it, Maria Hill and Agent Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, but they never talk to each other, at all. Now that doesn't mean that they're terrible characters. Black Widow is possibly the most intelligent one in the entire film, doing incredible interrogation sequences with the terrorists and with gods, if you include Loki. And Maria Hill did mean to have a much larger role in the film, but most of the roles were cut, and if you look at the deleted scenes you can see why. It was basically doing the same shtick that Black Widow does. There's no need to make two characters if they're kind of just carbon copies with different voices. Does this mean Avengers is a bad film? Well, no. But, as I believe the test should be useful, it does lead to the realization that, yeah, there needs to be more female Avengers in this. Because currently there's 6 of them, and only one of them's a girl. And she doesn't have any superpowers. It's also worth pointing out that Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, the other normal human without superpowers on the team, is pretty much superhuman anyway, considering he appears to be able to one-shot kill anything with his arrows, do incredible acrobatics, and has such an array of different arrowheads that he can be useful in pretty much all scenarios. He's actually better at killing people than Captain America, I think. Meanwhile, Agent Romanov has to resort to interrogations and talking and battles of wits and stealing weapons from opponents and using them against them, and being much more subtle in her approach. She can't dispatch massive groups of enemies en masse. The Bechdel test here doesn't say that The Avengers is a bad film. It's very hard to say that it's a bad film, considering, oh my god, so good. But it does allow you to view the film's pros and cons in terms of how it treats women. The conclusion you can really come to is that Joss Whedon is, of course, known and somewhat legendary for writing really strong, good female characters, but in The Avengers, he only really wrote one, considering just how many of Maria Hill's lines were cut. Another reason I feel that the Bechdel test is being misused by people right now is if you took a look at another film that definitely fails, something bad like Transformers Dark of the Moon, or Transformers 3, the third film of a never-ending franchise. It is a pile of crap. It is a bad film, okay? And it fails the Bechdel test quite rightly because Sam Witwicky's love interest, who I'm gonna quickly look up because she's so unmemorable, Carly Spencer, I didn't know she had a surname, is the only woman in it, really, apart from his own mum, or the only woman who actually has any kind of bearing on the plotline, no matter how insignificant it is. She doesn't talk to any other women, she doesn't have anything meaningful to say, she's introduced to us by a close-up shot of her ass walking towards Sam after they've clearly been post-coital in the early scenes. She is a pointless and bland character. The Bechdel test doesn't point out that she's bland, but if you use it and kind of assert which characters are in this and what they do, it becomes incredibly obvious incredibly quickly. Now, let's say that we wanted to make Transformers actually pass the Bechdel test. What would we do? Well, we could have Sam's previous love interest, who I'm also going to look up because, she's played by Megan Fox, which is never a good sign. God, she gets her own Wikipedia article? That I find just offensive. Michaela Baines. Okay, so she's Sam's love interest for the first 2 films. The one true love, and until Carly is his one true love instead, because deal with it. Now let's say that there's a flashback scene. We add a flashback scene into Transformers Dark of the Moon, wherein Michaela and Carly meet, for whatever reason. Let's say they talk about something other than Sam, who is their love interest. Let's say they talk about shoes and hair and being grease monkeys or something. And to fulfill Anita Sarkeesian's additional postulate onto the Bechdel test, let's say they talk for over a minute. Now, would this make the film any better? No, because they're bland and terrible characters. Adding more of them merely helps to water it down even further away from the actual robot fighting scenes, which is like the only reason the film should be allowed to exist in the first place. Fulfilling the Bechdel test does not mean that a film is any better at its portrayal of women than failing it. Just gives a nice baseline of which to judge it for points of discussion. It's a springboard. It's not a judging system. It's a springboard for discussing films critically. And you can find out all kinds of things by looking into that. For example, if you apply it to Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, you find that there are 2 female characters who are named but never meet. They are the main character, Major Motoko Kusanagi, who is awesome, and the Prime Minister of Japan. Now, if you look at why these women never meet and what happens here, you quickly begin to discover that the author, hoping I get this right, Masamune Shiro, has included only 2 women in the entire series who are in points of power. From this I've discussed with friends, and it does seem to ring true that maybe Masamune Shiro just likes seeing women be badass, in a kind of fetishistic sense. Consider that the Prime Minister is in a state of power, she seems mostly unflappable, and she's a very confident woman. Meanwhile, Mariko Kusanagi is a woman who shoots people to death, kicks them in the face, and pulls the lids off tanks, usually while completely naked. From the Bechdel test we can actually look at these films critically and go, oh, yeah, they are cool characters, but I wonder how the intention behind them was. And actually, I'm not dissing Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex, it's a fantastic series. But it does then seem less odd, or at least questionable and understandable, that there are only 2 women in the entire series, when it actually revolves around a team of people solving crimes. Really, there could be more room for another woman in Section 9. Finally, I'm going to go on to the thing that sparked me wanting to record this. On Tumblr, there was a post about, and there's quite a few posts like this that are coming up, and I don't understand why, that Stephen Moffat is a problematic writer, which I found incredibly odd. It was comparing the number of episodes he wrote or had control over that passed the Bechdel test compared to Russell T Davies, who is the original reviver of the New Who series. Russell T Davies rarely fails the Bechdel test, especially when compared to Moffat, who fails it kind of frequently. He has plenty of episodes where there are 2 named characters, but they don't speak to each other. Not just about a man, but they don't speak to each other at all. If we're using the Bechdel test here as a springboard for discussion, we can look at exactly why, and consider that maybe Doctor Who needs to be looked at much more critically rather than just spewing out the stats and saying, well, clearly Moffat's a bad writer. You've got to consider the context of the show. For starters, Doctor Who follows the adventures of a man and his female companion. The Doctor is always the one whose viewpoint is things are going to be viewed from. He is the main recurrence. He's the only character who will be in every episode of Doctor Who. Spare for the Dr. Light ones, when he is in them, but only for a little bit. Also consider that Russell T Davies, while during his control over Doctor Who, wrote for 3 series where the female character had a lot of close ties to their family. Rose Tyler would frequently interact with her own mother, and Martha Jones would talk to her entire family, and her mum would frequently call her because of the whole Harold Saxon thing. Therefore, immediately we have 2 women talking about something other than a man. Whereas Stephen Moffat's main companion has been Amelia Pond. Amy has no parents, as her first episode shows. She's been living alone thanks to a Vesper form being somewhat murderous and manipulative. And the main person she goes to talk to is her husband Rory, with whom she is happily married. He's partway through. Therefore, there is so much less opportunity for her to pass the Bechdel test by actually talking to anybody. They have to be characters written for the episode. Then, let's also consider that there is a massive difference between Moffat and Davies' writing, in that Davies likes making a lot of characters, and like having them have names and be important, and there's a lot of ensemble cast episodes, especially if you look at things like The End of Time, where all the companions meet up for a good old run of the TARDIS. Meanwhile, Moffat has more minimalist approaches to the cast. If you look at things like Silence in the Library and Blink, it's more about following a very small number of people. If there are extraneous people there, they're usually there to be killed off. Now, I will admit that Stephen Moffat has a lot less women in his episodes, but it doesn't feel like sexism so much as just something that happens. Meanwhile, Davies loves writing about loads of people. And so, yeah, naturally he's going to pass more episodes just because there's so many people there all talking to each other. Some criticisms were also brought up for Sherlock, which people in the post seemed to really like, but thought was problematic. In Sherlock, Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss are adapting the old novels of Sherlock Holmes, and there are a predominantly male cast in them. Look, I mean, we've got the main recurring people are Sherlock and Watson. Main enemy, Moriarty. Main assistant of sorts is Inspector Lestrade, all male. There are 2 recurring women throughout the series in Mrs. Hudson, who is usually in short bursts interacting with the boys because she is the landlady, and Molly Hooper, who is there as an auxiliary kind of help thing to get CSI into the whole thing. These women are not going to interact with each other very much. I think I can only remember them actually talking to each other during the Christmas party. There's also the incredibly rarely used character of Irene Adler, who appears in only 1 episode. The focus of the episode is around understanding her and her relationship with Sherlock himself. It's gonna fail the Bechdel test. She doesn't really talk to people. The point I want to make here is that the Bechdel test is a great point to springboard discussions and research into why things fail it. It is not to be used to judge the quality of something, partly because it can't. There is no judging given for quality. It is a great benchmark to meet when you're making a film or a TV series with a variety of cast members, but it needs to have that variety of cast members. If it focuses on one person's perspective, or if it's something like WALL-E, where it's not even about humans, it's about this love story between two robots, one male, one female. It's kind of assumedly one male, one female, really they're genderless, you suppose. Well, if it's just like a romantic thing like that, of course it's going to fail. There's not enough other characters for it to pass. WALL-E barely talks to anyone other than Eve in the entirety of the film. If there is an ensemble cast, or a small-ish cast, like 6 people, it is always best to try and have an even gender split, rather than having Black Widow and 5 awesome Supermen. Series like Friends and How I Met Your Mother seem to do this pretty well, and it's a good system to use to ensure some kind of diversity. But as we've seen from examples like Final Fantasy XIII, when you gender flip a character, which is what happened to Fang, it doesn't mean that the character's any good, nor does it mean that the game is any good. On that note, Square Enix, please retire Lightning. None of us care. Let me know how you feel about this in the comments below. I'd love to get a discussion going about this. How important should the Bechdel test be when looking into the judgment of the portrayal of women in media? I think it's interesting, but it is by no means necessary or the definite line. As for if it could be improved or anything like that, I don't think it needs improvement. It just needs to be used in the right context. As I don't think it is, and I think it is for the best that there isn't really a formula to making a good film. There are formulas to making ones that sell, but in order to make one that has like great female representation or diverse cast or just is good quality, the only formula you could really have is be a good writer and write something. Although that would be not the Bechdel test, but the being Neil Gaiman test. Thanks for listening.